Aman. Okay. So, first of all, greetings.
Sorry,
No.
Milena, I will 1 minute, okay?
Yeah.
Continua reunint els seus equips jurídics per preparar el seu
Good
recurs. Volen,
evening.
sobretot, que estiguin molt ben fonamentats pel que fa a la...
Please, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Bienvenidos, benvinguts a tots. Welcome to our webinar series Semblanzas or Profiles. This week, devoted to Raimon Panikkar, one of the most prominent thinkers of the 20th century, a reference in interfaith studies, a bridge between East and West, and as the great Mexican intellectual Octavio Paz describes him in his essay Vislumbres de la India, quote, at the same time, theologian and a traveling bird in all climates, a man with an electric intelligence. Our guest today is Milena Carrara. Milena Carrara has been the closest person to Raimon Panikkar in the last 20 years of his life, both as a scholar of his thought and as a close collaborator. She has, in fact, translated and curated many of Panikkar's work. In 2006, together with him, she published. Sorry, can you mute the sound to avoid interferences, please? So in 2006, together with him, Milena Carrara published Pilgrimage to Kailasa, which appeared later in an extended version, along with the film interview Raimon Panikkar, My Life. Milena Carrara organized with Raimon Panikkar all his writings into the 18 volumes that make up his opera Omnia. And she has curated their publication, which is now close to completion in 5 languages. In India, the opera Omnia is published by Motilal Benarsidas, and in Spain by Herder in Spanish and Fragmenta in Catalan. From the personal diaries that Panikkar entrusted to her, she has compiled the book The Water of the Drop, fragments from the diaries. Milena Carrara is also president of the Fundació Vivarium Raimon Panikkar, which was founded by Panikkar himself, and represents the intellectual heir to his entire work. And she has also held numerous sangamas, including The Spirit of Religion, 2006-2008, which featured testimonies from 8 different religious traditions. If I'm not wrong, the sangamas are like small dialogue groups to discuss spiritual issues. Well, thank you so much, Milena, for being today with us at this virtual meeting. It's such a really a great honor. You probably are the most authorized and qualified person at the present time to talk about Raimon Panikkar's life and work. Thank you, Milena. But today we have also another guest with us, which is Ignacio Moreta. I don't know if he's already here. Ignacio Moreta is the publisher and editor of Fragmenta, a young publishing house that, as they say themselves, publish non-religious books about religions. And as I mentioned it before, they are responsible of the Catalan version of Panikkar's opera Omnia. So Ignacio Moreta will introduce us shortly to the opera Omnia. So, and finally, I would like to thank also, as a collaborator in this series, our friend from Casa Asia and Casa de la India. Well, so now, Milena, I give you the floor, so we are all ears. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Martí. First of all, dear greetings. Dear greetings, mejor deseos, saluti cari to all Raimon friends who may be here and to my personal friends. Well, I'm really honored for being invited to this webinar organized by Instituto Cervantes in Delhi to talk about Panikkar. And Panikkar was no doubt one of the greatest thinkers of the 20th, early 21st centuries. He was a great philosopher, theologian, expert in free religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, and of course, first Christianity. And a pioneer of the dialogue, interculture and interreligious culture. But before delivering my talk, I would like you to see just a 5 minutes short DVD with Panikkar in his house at Tarertet, a small house he lived in the last years of his life. But Panikkar telling us the metaphor of the window, which explains, best of all, what he meant with an interreligious dialogue. So please, Martí, if you can show this short metaphor, and then I will go on with my talk. Is it possible, Martí?
One of the metaphors I use is that we are all seeing the world from our particular point of view. We see the world through a window. And here I say two things. First, the more cleaner the window is, the less I see the window and the glass. And the more I am enthused and in love with what I see. So I don't see my window. I see through the window. And I need my fellow who tell me, look here, you are looking through a window. But then I have to tell him, sorry, you also look at the window. And then we compare notes. And in Great Bar we see the same landscape, but perhaps we see it a different way also. And perhaps I say, no, I would like to see that, and it's all right. So we need each other. But here's another thing with the metaphor of the window. I see through my window, and I cannot say that I do not see what I see through my window. I don't see through the window of my neighbor. But if I love my neighbor, which I think is not bad, then I will have to hear the description of what my neighbors say, and then say, well, sorry, I don't see that, because I see the window. But I hear you telling me something else. Well, what do I discover? I discover two things. I discover that the other, my neighbor, doesn't see the same world as I see. But I discover that I don't see the whole world. Because unless he's a fool and I'm a fanatic, or I haven't heard him, I hear. And you remember that St. Paul said that faith comes from hearing. I hear the other telling me something about the world, about reality, about he or she sees through the window, that I don't. And then, I say, then the world is much nicer than I thought. I thought I was seeing the whole picture, and now you're telling me that the thing is little, I don't like more or like better. It's an enrichment, it's a challenge. And here begins the interreligious dialogue. You say what you hear, you say what you believe, you say you experience, and are ready at the same time to hear the other telling other narratives, other beliefs, other experiences. And then we dialogue.
Marti, are you there? Well, Raimon Panikkar frequently emphasized the difference between identification and identity, which, though inseparable, are not the same thing. Identification is what an individual is. It's constituted by the biographical data that can be found in a biography or on a passport, and nowadays by simply searching in internet. Whereas to discover a person's identity, who a person is in his deepest reality, one must look at who that person has become in freedom and love throughout his entire life. Having had the privilege of being close to Panikkar during the last 20 years of his life, translating and editing many of his books and working with him on the publication of the Opera Omnia, I would like to attempt to trace, as best as I can, his true identity. I will try to sum up the most salient events of Panikkar's life, focusing on his human and spiritual identity, the core of his true being, based on my first-hand knowledge of him, his biographical notes, his writings, as well as his diaries, which he has so trustingly placed in my care. Raimon Panikkar was born into a middle-class family in Barcelona, Spain, on November 1918. As his father was an Indian of Hindu faith, and his mother a Catalan Catholic, he learned from early childhood to adopt, cultivate, and speak of both religious traditions, in which he always felt perfectly at home. For high school, he was educated by the Jesuit. In his words, "My father, as a Hindu and not a Christian, should have gone to hell. By hell, I mean the authentic, real fire hell of the pre-Vatican II period. My mother, however, who was a Catholic, never described it to me in these terms. Quite the opposite, in fact. Nevertheless, as a child growing up in an Orthodox Roman Catholic environment, I very quickly picked up these suggestions. Later on, as a young lad, I was forced to begin to theologize in order to understand this faith and ease the suffering I felt. The question seemed to me to be too serious, and I was too shy to speak of it, either with my mother or with anyone else, even a priest. The only option left to me was to trust in God's pity, and subsequently to delve further into the matter myself. And this explains his deep interest in the study of religions since he was very young. In 1936, as a result of the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War and the impending danger to his family, he was forced to flee with his sister and two brothers to Germany, where he spent 3 years continuing his university studies in Bonn. And in summer 1939, when the Civil War was over, Panikkar made a long and adventurous journey on bicycle through Switzerland and Italy with the intention to return to Germany to complete his studies. However, the outbreak of World War II forced him to change plan and remain in Spain. In 1936, he received a doctorate in philosophy, then in chemistry, then in theology from the Pontifical Lateran University in Rome. But important, in 1946, he was also ordained a priest. As I said at the beginning, Panikkar was an expert in 3 religions. Clearly, it was neither an intellectual decision nor an irresponsible whim that led him to declare, I started as a Christian, I discovered I was a Hindu, and I returned as a Buddhist without having ceased to be a Christian. He lived these religions not as experiments, but as a deep experience. It was basically an existential process, which he attempted to express intellectually in many of his writings. A long and profound sadhana, during which the heart, the spirit, the body, and his entire life were involved. From the very beginning, this represented a form of interreligious dialogue, though in actual fact it was more of an intra-religious quest. And from now on, I will use his own words taken from his diaries, referring to his being a Christian. As I studied my religion more and more deeply, I quickly found out that the metaphysicians, and especially the mystics, had a completely different vision of the work of God than that presented by the Church of my day. I discovered that the Christian scholastics viewed God as a supreme being, and that to them, God is being. They convinced me that the Christian event is a part of the real definition of being, and for this reason is of universal importance. I began to understand that I was not alone with my metaphysical conception of the event of Christ. I was then able, beginning from the inner image of Christianity, to place the Christic event in a broader and more profound frame of reference than that allowed by the historical scenario alone. I thus became aware that my true identity did not begin just 2,000 years ago. The mystics also confirmed to me this metaphysical vision. The Christian mystics, the Greek fathers, the German, Spanish, and other schools all reinforced my spiritual life, so that many years later, I was able to express my conviction to several theologian friends that I saw no need to leave a corrupt club, the church, since I had never joined it. They called me the priest of Melchizedek, in view of the great importance I gave to the fact that I had been ordained priest according to an order that was not Jewish, nor of Yahweh, but of an uncircumcised man with no family tree. The church to which I had dedicated myself and in which I believed and continue to believe is the Ecclesia ab Abel, the church of the first natural-born man, the cosmic secret from the beginning of the ages. In short, I discovered that I had had access since the beginning of my conscious existence to dimensions of the Christian faith which allowed me to live in peace with the other part of my being. The influence of my father, who sang and explained to me the Bhagavad Gita, who taught me the first elements of Sanskrit and created a non-sectarian Hinduist atmosphere, reinforced also by the deeply Catholic but open-minded sentiment of my mother. At the end of 1954, Panikkar left Europe for India on an apostolic mission, and there he was incardinated into the diocese of Varanasi and remained a priest of that diocese until the end of his life. From 1955 to 1967, except for many trips to Italy and other countries, he lived in utmost simplicity in 2 small rooms above the Shiva temple in Hanuman on the bank of the Ganges. Now, referring to his being a Hindu, always with his words. I went to India with the intention of never returning to the West. And here I immersed myself in the traditions and religions of my ancestors. I was 36 years old. For the first 10 years, I concentrated on nothing else. Then I continued for another decade, subsequently alternating my time there with periods of teaching at the University of Harvard, 5 years, and the University of California, 18 years. I went to India to learn, not as someone who has already studied something, but as one who is searching. I sat at the feet of a teacher, studied the language of the natives, and was just one of the many. This was not a strategy, and it had not been planned from the beginning. It was, quite simply, my karma. It was not difficult for me to take on my Hindu identity. I just had to let it emerge. I remember many moments on my pilgrimage in which I carried out the rituals when I went to Gangotri at the source of the Ganges, when I mixed with the masses at Kedarnath and Badrinath in the Himalayas and in the south of India. In this period, Panikkar's life was marked by his existential involvement in the religion of his ancestors, to which he belonged, and which had nurtured him since his birth, and by an attempt to integrate them together. A number of articles and books date back to this period. Gradually, timidly even, he went from seeking to make Hinduism acceptable to himself and to non-Hindus, to presenting it as a true religion, discovering in it the living, saving principle that Christians call Christ, but which cannot be limited to a single name, for its true name is a supername, a name beyond all names. This led him to declare himself both a Christian and a Hindu, according to the accepted, or at least acceptable, canons of both traditions. And this process, or rather progress, can be traced from the unknown Christ of Hinduism to the supername, passing through his German and Spanish writings. We should also mention the intense work which, in his enthusiasm, he had expected would take no more than a year, but actually took 10 years of his time to publish Bhattarmanjari, the Vedic Experience. In spite of the abyss between Hinduism and the Vedas, Panikkar was convinced that there was in fact a deep bond between the two. Modern Hindus pay lip service to the Vedas, just as many Christians refer to the Bible without having much knowledge of it. In his words, I soon realized that the best service I could provide was not an arranged translation of some Vedic texts for Christian use, but an independent scholarly work presenting the Vedas as they understand themselves to be. Vedic Sanskrit is not classical Sanskrit, nor the Vedas just some Upanishads and well-known Rigvedic hymns. I plunge in that jungle, and after having introduced and translated what I think is the most complete collection of the entire Vedic message, I reduced the text almost by the half, so that it could be a text meaningful to our contemporaries, independently to any religious or cultural persuasion. What remained, nevertheless, was a book of almost 1,000 pages. Panikkar achieved such a degree of connaturality with the Vedic world that certain Orthodox pundits even began to regard him as a reincarnated rishi. Although, in practical aspect, he was assisted by a small team of collaborators, this work was basically a spiritual experience for him. And now to Buddhism. Panikkar was drawn to it only in the late 60s. He did with it what he had done with Hinduism. That is, not experimenting it, but experiencing it. In short, the orthopraxis that had led him to both Christianity and Hinduism was now spontaneously bringing him to Buddhism. Though he embraced neither syncretism nor eclecticism, charges against which he was forced to defend himself. Panikkar found himself having to reenact what was for him the fundamental experience of the Buddha, namely sunyata. The challenge for him here was atheism. His book, The Silence of Buddha, crystallizes his understanding and, in a way, acceptance of the Anatmavada, or the teaching of the not I, not self. Now again, in Panikkar's words, my Buddhist identity is different from my Hindu identity, since I did not inherit it at birth. My initiation into Buddhism also came about spontaneously. They were, however, the result of an inner work that, in all humility and obviously minutis minuendis, resemble that of the Buddha. The deeply rooted instability of the human condition, or, in academic terms, an experience comparable to the dynamics found among Hindu and Christians alike, of the discovery of nothing at the end of everything. The encounter of the Christian and the Hindu with the Absolute leads to the conviction that if this Absolute is to avoid suffocating all the rest, it must correspond to the experience of the void. Deep down in the heart, the Buddhist experience leads to the sudden appearance of a void at the very core of being, and this takes place not just at the end, but at the very beginning, from the Atman to the Anatmavada. In my case, this took place rather casually, although it arrived just at the right time, so to speak, after Shankara, Thomas Aquinas, and Heidegger. For an entire course, I had the Bhikkhu Kashyapa, who later became vice chancellor of the Buddhist University of Nalanda, generally met twice a week for 2 hours, with one time him explaining Buddhist mysticism, and the next I expounded on Christian mysticism. It was he who invited me to accompany him as a third person in the welcoming committee for the Dalai Lama in Sarnath, where he was to arrive directly after fleeing from Tibet. Thanks to this, I was able in these first years to hold long discussions with the Dalai Lama. Much later, I spent several months at Room Tech with the 14th Karmapa, who also honored me with his friendship. In addition, I have spent several weeks in Japanese Zen monasteries and had other contacts with the Buddhist religious experience. Now, let's continue with the life. In 1966, Panikkar was called to Harvard University as a visiting professor, and from 1971 to 1987, he taught comparative philosophy of religion at the University of California, Santa Barbara, spending a semester teaching in the US and the rest of the year in India. It was only then that Panikkar was ready to accept, in addition to Christianity, Hinduism, and Buddhism, the fourth tradition, namely secularity, and became sincerely and fully secular. The center of his life was no longer Europe, as in the beginning, nor India, as later, but North America. Here, his work was more that of a professor than that of a priest in the conventional sense of the word. Many of his writings, especially those written in French for the Castelli Colloquy in Rome, may be said to express this effort to recover his naked humanism of any religious tradition in the classical sense of the term. In 1987, Panikkar retired from academic life and moved to a small village at Tariftet, where he continued his life of contemplation and wrote many books, The New Innocence, The Fullness of Man, Mysticism, and so on. Here, he founded the Center Vivarium, where he regularly had courses, seminars, and meetings on philosophical, religious, and cultural themes, and undertook in-depth studies of different religion traditions. In September 1994, Panikkar, not young and with a heart problem, went on pilgrimage to Kailash and to Mansarovar in Tibet. His last pilgrimage, which he defined also an ultimate pilgrimage. Ultimate here means of no return. Ramana Maharshi said, if by chance one does return, it is by pure grace. He has become a new being. Many pilgrimages entail risk, but this one particularly so. It was a great experience for Panikkar, as you can see, you better read in his book Pilgrimage to Kailash, Delhi Motilal 2018, and also for me, who accompanied him. I will read just a few passages from his diary. Pilgrimage, not to touch or see, but to be there. I'm going to walk with the gods, jump outside history, break with all my commitments, a deeper entrance into silence. I'm taking no books and no papers. A pilgrimage whose goal is to allow myself, step by step, to be visited by the Absolute. And then after, the journey was strenuous and fantastic. The days a torture of the no roads in the land cruisers. The nights a continuous nightmare in the single tent. Each night a new experience, feeling the altitude, experience of the void, of death. The Mass at the feet of Kailash was a powerful and a real event, besides an experience. It culminated the masses held on Arunachala and at Gangotri with Abhishitananda. In 1998, after 3 years of hard work dedicated to organizing his vast literary production, working then on the publication of his opera Omnia, first in Italian by Jacobuk, and then in Catalan by Fermenta, French, Spanish, and English. All of Panikkar's writings are autobiographical. They do not deal simply with the problem of the mind, but with the concern of his heart, and indeed of his entire existence, and which he strove constantly to clarity and analyze by studying in depth the problems of human life. I remember one day, while I was helping him to organize the contents of his complete works, seeing the piles of books and articles which cover the entire floor of his study become nearly skyscrapers. I burst out nearly in despair. Perhaps the line as the editor of the whole. But why have you written so many words in your life? Above all, when you always say that silence in meditation is the most important thing. Raimon was my spiritual master, so I waited for his reply anxiously. I did not live for the sake of writing, but I wrote to live in a more conscious way, so as to help my brothers with the thoughts, not only from my own mind, but also arising from a superior source. This was his answer. For him, knowledge and experience accompany each other. It is no accident that Panikkar Opera Omnia starts with the volume on mysticism. Those who were closely acquainted with him know that more than anything, he was a mystic who concealed his spirituality under an intellectual mantle. Panikkar dedicated his entire life, including his youth, to deciphering the mystery of existence. and tried to always be ready to offer help to those who were plagued by ultimate questions. I will end my talk reading again one passage from his diary. I consider that what I have to say and what I have generally said in the realm of ideas is relevant and important, but I doubt that my personal life, except for a very small circle of friends, is at all interesting, except for the fact that it could be described in a picturesque way. In other words, I'm not convinced that the value of my life is translatable into words or writings, or even that it has a paradigmatic value for some, or provides the necessary background for understanding my ideas. I'm not saying that I consider my life to be without any special value. On the contrary, I'm convinced that every life has a unique value. But my contribution to life is life itself. When I get up before dawn and all is quiet around me, including the stars, I'm not doing it to win heaven, accumulate merit, or even simply get some work done. I'm not doing it for work, but for life. I'm doing it so I may live and live as authentically as I can. To live authentically means to be ready to die tomorrow without missing a thing. Perhaps the best book I could write would be a prayer. And yet I'm afraid I will never write it unless I stop praying. Panikkar's long, intense life ended on August 26th, 2010, at the age of 91. Part of his ashes was buried in the small cemetery of Tavertet, according to the Christian tradition, and part of them was scattered over the sacred waters of the Ganges, in keeping with the Hindu tradition, as I had promised to him before he left his experience on earth. I hope I've been able to give you a sense of his true identity.
Thank you so much, Milena, for your wonderful lecture about Panikkar, Raimon Panikkar. I hope our audience has enjoyed as much as myself. Well, before giving the floor to the audience, maybe you would like to say a few words about the Raimon Panikkar's prize.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Please.
Because it is something that, well, Vivarium has instituted for young scholars, young experts, not necessarily scholars. This prize, which consists in the gift of the whole series of the 18th books, and also to have the study, the essay published, and also 3,000 euros. The aim is to spread Raimon Panikkar's insights, thoughts among young people, a new generation, in order that they can go on continuing this task. The winner, the 7 winners, because Vivarium has instituted this prize in collaboration with the publishing houses of the Opera Omnia. And the winners will be congratulated next year in October at Venice, where it will be called held a conference in Venice. Exactly in Venice in 2008, at the presence of Panikkar, we celebrated the beginning of his opera Omnia. So it's nice to celebrate the conclusion, the completion of it in Venice, and also to welcome these young people. All the information will be found in the official site of Fondazione Vivarium Raimon Panikkar, which is simply Raimon-Panikkar.org. Okay, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Milena. I'd like to open the session to our audience. So if anyone wants to make any comment or a question, just open the mic and the camera, please, and go ahead. In whatever language, maybe in Spanish and English. So please, if anyone has any question. No? So, well, so then we are going to wrap up the meeting. So, but before concluding, I would like to invite the audience to participate in all our cultural activities. So our next cultural event will be a conversation between two poets, the Spaniard Jesús Aguado and Bengali Subro Bandopadiai. It will be the 8th of July, and you are all invited. So, and you can check all the information in our website and in our social media. So if nobody has any comment or question, so we're going to wrap up the meeting. I would like to thank again Milena for being here today, and all the audience. So thank you all, and see you soon. Hasta pronto. Fins aviat.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Martí, and greetings and best wishes to the audience.
Thank you, Milena.